I know that we have a number of people at WellSprings who are therapists, and you're one of them. And I talked a couple weeks ago, actually, with another therapist in our congregation, with Bev, about relationships during this time. So I'm recycling some of the questions I admit from Bev. The first one being just for maybe you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do professionally and how long you've been doing it and what kinds of things you help people with.
Yeah, sure. So I have been, in the counseling field for about 20 years now, and started out doing, inpatient hospital, then did family-based therapy, which is like in-home family therapy. Then once I got licensed, I ended up, I did some group practices, and then about, I think it's 3 years now, I've been in private practice. But then I also work for Sonari today doing an intensive outpatient program also, which is like group therapy for folks who are struggling a little bit more with anxiety, depression, to the point where like maybe they can't really function very well. Once a week therapy just isn't cutting it. And when you see them 4 days a week in a small group setting, which groups are probably my most favorite thing to do. I think it's a really amazing thing. Like I can talk all day long about what I know about anxiety as a therapist and depression, but it's really helpful for other people to be able to share with each other who are going through the same thing. And I say that I'm an expert on anxiety because I deal with it myself. So I have panic disorder, anxiety, I struggle with depression, like I get it. And I have zero problems letting people know that I also struggle with it. And so that's really what I tend to help folks with. I tend to see a lot more women in my private practice who are dealing with not only like anxiety, depression, but codependency, relationship issues, folks who really want to incorporate things like breath work and yoga along with talk therapy. So I'm not just a traditional like sit and tell me how you feel kind of therapist, although that's awesome. We do a lot of movement, and like I said, some of my clients are doing walk and talk sessions with me because we know that a lot of times this stuff isn't just in our heads, like it's in our whole body. So we try and get both involved. Yeah.
I know that that's true for everything we deal with. Our world often makes us think of ourselves as disembodied heads like this. But for anxiety especially, right? I think there's so many ways that not being in touch with the body makes it harder to cope with anxiety. Would you say that's true?
Absolutely. I think there's this idea that like if I try to numb out or ignore it or avoid it, that it's somehow going to get better. And the opposite is actually true. So helping folks learn how to lean into it, but not dwell on it to the point where like then you just feel worse. Like it's acknowledging that it's there and how are we feeling it in our bodies, and then what do we need? Like how do we soothe ourselves in a way that's healthy? Yeah.
I'm curious, because I didn't put this on my list of questions, but because we can often be so disembodied, maybe you could just share what are some of the ways that anxiety can show up in the body? Maybe if we're not thinking, oh, I'm feeling anxious right now, right. How might we notice if we are anxious?
Yeah, so it's different for everybody, but I can say like for me, it's a tightness in the chest, maybe shaking. Sometimes when I'm really super anxious, like it might even be happening now a little bit because I'm a little nervous doing this, like my face gets red, right? For some people, it's like a holding of tension somewhere. So maybe like the shoulders are up or our jaw is clenched. And yeah, like you said, sometimes we can't even say like, oh, this is anxiety. It might be like my body feels really weird and I don't feel right and I don't know what this is and I'm totally freaked out about that. So it can show up in so many. I had somebody a long time ago tell me that he felt most of his anxiety in his feet, like his feet hurt all the time. And that was where he fit, which was really interesting. Yeah, so I think everybody kind of manifests it in different ways and learning how to recognize it, like that it is not just, but it's just anxiety. Like it will pass, but in the moment it doesn't feel that way sometimes.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive, I think, for a lot of people that recognizing it and naming it and greeting it can help it actually dissipate and move through. Yeah.
Yeah, nobody wants to acknowledge that it's there, myself included. Like I spent a lot of my life trying to run away from it and avoid it. But what I found is the more I acknowledge it and say like, this is what is going on with me, the better I feel.
Yeah. How did you decide to become a therapist?
This is always such a weird thing. So, and this is really great for people who maybe are thinking of like a career change, or like young adults who are like in college and not knowing what they want to do. I went to college not knowing what the hell I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to be a writer. My undergrad degree is in journalism and women's studies. It has nothing to do with therapy or psychology. And then when I left undergrad, when I graduated, I worked a couple of like temp jobs, and I ended up, my senior year of college, I volunteered for a rape crisis center, and I did PR for them because my major was journalism, but they also required you to do volunteer work and staffing the hotlines. And I loved it. Like I was, this is it. Like, this is the thing that I wanted to do. And I didn't even know how I would go about making that change. So I ended up just graduating with that degree. And then about a year later, I got a job interview at Women Against Rape in Delaware County. And the woman who I believe still runs it had gone to the same college as me, majored in journalism and women's studies. And she was like, it doesn't matter that you don't have like a psychology background. Like, you clearly are passionate about this. And that's where it started. And then I had a colleague there who was like, if you really want to do this, like, you need to go back to school and go to grad school. And that's what I did. That's how it all started, was working there. I worked at the Delaware County Women Against Rape, I think, for 7 years. Yeah. So that's really what got me into this. And I always loved helping people, even like as a kid in high school. Like, I would be the one that all my friends would come to, but I just didn't even know that that's what I wanted. So,
yeah. I appreciate your openness. I know you're often open about these things in talking about your own anxiety and the things that you've been through. Is that something you were aware of and knew about before you got into doing this work professionally, or did that awareness come as you were learning your skills and your craft, I guess?
it came later on. I was very disconnected from my own emotions and feelings, and I think I ran anxious probably my whole life. And it wasn't until, gosh, I don't think I was in grad school yet, but I was definitely working at the Rape Crisis Center, where I was so depressed and anxious, like I couldn't leave the house. I thought there was something wrong with me. And I remember my mom coming to visit because she was super concerned. And we were sitting and talking, and I was feeling better because we were talking. And she was like, I think this is like anxiety. Like, I think what you're dealing with is anxiety. And I'm like, oh, like, you're probably right. So I think it took a long time for me to come to a place of like acceptance that that's what it was. And then finally getting my own help. And I'm very open about my sobriety. I've been sober for 10 years. I definitely self-medicated with alcohol, which, as we know, makes anxiety so much worse.
Among other things. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I was working in the field, and that I got sober all in the middle of it. And that's kind of where I think started the real deep work, is when I finally put the alcohol away and started kind of looking at my own stuff. Yeah.
It's amazing how and part of why I asked you that is because I had a hunch that might be the answer. And, for people to see that even people who are training and going to school for this are sometimes not connected with what's going on inside of them. And it's a shame, I think, that our world often treats mental health as like a special interest. Like, there's certain people who have mental health issues, but mental health is just like physical health, right? We all have bodies, we all have minds, we all have mental health. We're all somewhere on a spectrum at any given moment in our lives, in terms of whether we're doing well, feeling healthy, coping well, or struggling, or dealing with something, or in an acute episode of some kind of mental health challenge. So just normalizing that, I think, and remembering that all of us, this is an issue that affects all of us. It's not an issue only for people who have mental health challenges, because that's everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's people, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this, but I know that I actually have like folks who felt that this whole pandemic, like everything that they've kind of done up until now, has really prepared them for this, because they know what anxiety is and they know how it feels. And then there's people who are like, what is going on? Like, I've never felt this way before. So the people who struggle with anxiety their whole lives are like, had a leg up. So, not everybody, but a lot of people. We were kind of joking about it. And then other people are like,
I'm ready. Yeah.
now I know what you've been going through for so long.
Yeah. Yeah. I've noticed some of those things too. I mean, there have been times that I've just like checked in with my therapist, like, hey, this is happening and I've never noticed that before. And she's just like, yeah, I mean, this year is bringing out new stuff for people, you know, and it's good that you can recognize it and then we can talk about it, you know. So yeah.
Absolutely.
So that was actually one of my questions. You know, in terms of the kinds of mental health challenges that people are bringing to you as a therapist these days, how do you think the events of this year have, you answered a little bit of that, how the events of this year affected the kinds of challenges people are bringing to you?
So, like I said, some people are finding that like they're doing really well with this because it's maybe you have social anxiety, for example, and now it's like, oh, good, I don't have to go anywhere, you know, that kind of thing. Like, yeah. So people are feeling better, but then obviously when things started to open up and then more obligations start to come into play, then that all shows back up again. And I just totally lost my train of thought. Hang on, it'll come back.
It's okay.
Oh, I feel like I'm a broken record, but I like a lot of clients and myself included will say like everything just seems so much harder. And there's always this undercurrent of like you're coming to therapy or you're you know reaching out for like a specific problem, but underneath that is a global pandemic and you know political issues and everything that's stressing us all out. So it's making everything just a little bit harder. And I think that kind of has like a whole other challenge. It just makes things way more difficult for people, or you know, folks who maybe we would have come up with like a plan for them to be more social or to get around more people. It's kind of hard to do that right now because you want to be careful and you don't want to take a whole lot of risks. Or going to the gym, we know exercise can be so helpful for anxiety. And that's not something a lot of people can do right now, although there's alternatives, which I'm hoping that we'll talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you found that there are people coming to you for therapy for the first time this year?
For the first,
or seeking that kind of support for the first time?
I haven't yet. Not with my practice. Like it's people maybe coming back to therapy, but not necessarily for the first time. Not yet, at least. Yeah, but I know that lots of people are though. Like I know, especially larger like group practices are seeing a lot of new folks. Like I know that's happening, just not me personally, but yeah.
I've read a lot of the, there's a lot of articles out now that are sort of about how to prepare for this winter, you know, and kind of thinking ahead to what kinds of supports do you want to have in place. Yeah. And I know one of the things that has been in seemingly every one of those articles is, you know, think about your mental health. If you don't have a therapist, look for one now, you know, reach out. And actually some of them have said, you know, people might be full, you know, soon if folks are reaching out.
Yeah, definitely things are picking up. But what's great is that there's so many options now with telehealth. I think there were so many therapists, myself included, who were not super comfortable with that kind of tech. And it's made it a little bit easier. And then there's those other platforms, the text therapy platforms, which aren't necessarily ideal, but like things like BetterHelp and things like that are really accessible for people.
Yeah. And might be more financially accessible too.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, there's lots of really great platforms for people who maybe are struggling financially. Although I always say to people, like, always ask, like, if you're maybe seeking somebody out and they don't take insurance or their rates are too high, like, don't dismiss it. Ask if they can lower their rates because a lot of times they will. You know, we want to help. At least I do.
Yeah. Yeah. We have a couple comments that actually came in with specific questions and stories about anxiety. So we should start focusing on that, I think, a little bit. And I'll read out some of those questions and comments as we get into it. So, I mean, one of the questions that I was curious about, you know, you shared them, I've seen them. There are all these memes going around about anxiety this year, how they're piling all of these different kinds of anxiety on top of us. So I guess, I mean, do you think that 2020 anxiety is actually worse or different than anxiety in other times of this world? And is it different in a particular way? Like, how is it different if it is?
That's a good question. I think it's probably relative, like depending on what you're dealing with, it's going to be different. Um, like from my experience, this definitely feels different. I mean, as far as I know, none of us have ever dealt with a global pandemic in this way. So that's really different. And then having to change our lives around it. And I think the political climate, and also, you know, a lot of us are waking up to all the racial injustices this year too. I do. I think those anxieties feel a little bit different. A lot of this is unfamiliar for folks. And having a place where you can feel safe to talk about it is really important.
When professionals define anxiety, I'm finding that one of the things I'm thinking about in this conversation is like how much of it is something that sort of you carry within yourself and is part of how you approach the world, and how much of it is the situations and the circumstances you find yourself in, because that does seem like one of the things that's different to me about this year, right? We have this huge new set of circumstances we're dealing with. And I guess I realize I don't even know, you know, is the medical definition or the therapeutic definition of anxiety more about how we respond to things, or is it also about what's happening in the world around us?
It is. So it's our response to things, but of course, like certain events can set that off. And like I said, people who maybe have never experienced anxiety before maybe are experiencing those feelings for the first time this year. And it, you know, it's feeling keyed up all the time, maybe not being able to rest, ruminating about things, you know, dwelling on the past or focusing on the future too much, sleep problems. Like it encompasses so much, and it's not a hard thing to diagnose, but it is a pretty common thing that all of us deal with. It's just to what level is it kind of a diagnosable? I'm not sure if that answers the question or not.
No, it makes sense. But one of the comments that came in was from Michael Stazarski at WellSprings, who was talking specifically about sleep problems. He just said, I have a lot of anxiety at night trying to sleep. My brain just goes all sorts of different directions.
Yeah, that's super fun, isn't it? It's one of those things where like, you're like, oh, like I had a good day. Like I'm not having a lot of anxiety. And all of a sudden at night, your brain's like, let me tell you about all these horrible things that might happen and probably won't happen. But let me just tell you that that's what's going to happen. Absolutely. Yeah.
Does it happen because you're resting? Like because you're not, yeah.
Yeah, there's no distraction, right? We're quiet. And it definitely happens to me. And what I'm hearing a lot is people, even when you do get to sleep, a lot of people are having nightmares. It's a lot of remnants from the day. Yeah. So that's like the number one thing, I think, when somebody's coming to me and not sleeping, like that's kind of the first thing we try and focus on. Because if you're not sleeping, it's really hard to get a whole lot of other stuff done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do we want to?
So what kinds of suggestions do you have for healthy strategies for coping with anxiety and managing it?
Yeah. So going back to the sleep, maybe that's kind of the first thing to talk about. It's obviously like good sleep hygiene is number one, and you can look up a ton of articles on that, and it's pretty self-explanatory. Like have a bedtime routine, go to bed at the same time every night, wake up at the same time in the morning. But then it's kind of like, that's all well and good, but then what do I do when I get into bed and I'm having, you know, a lot of anxious thoughts? So some suggestions that have been helpful for other people, and myself included, is writing before bed. Like just writing out all the things maybe that you're worried about, or things that maybe you forgot to get done. Like write them down, put them in the book and close it, like a container almost. That's one way. Practicing some breathing strategies before bed. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. Like it could be as simple as breathing in for 4 counts, breathing out for 6 to 8 counts, just making the exhale longer. Because then that tells your body that you're safe. It engages the parasympathetic nervous system. So that can be really helpful. Listening to, there's so many great apps now for bedtime meditations. I love Yoga Nidra, which is basically just a really long meditation before bed. that's a really great way to have your mind kind of focus on something else, and then to fall asleep.
Yeah.
I can see. Oh, somebody's saying they swear by tea, turmeric tea, to fall asleep. Yeah, teas, chamomile, if you're not allergic to it, that can be really helpful. Soothing, doing anything that's soothing, like that involves your senses. So like taking a bath, if you have that available to you, drinking a cup of tea, but really savoring it and drinking it mindfully. Being mindful, like trying to focus on whatever it is you're doing in the moment is really helpful too. So it's really trying to find, almost like make a little toolbox for yourself, like figure out what strategies work for you. And for me too, and a lot of people, getting some movement in at some point during the day is really helpful, but it doesn't have to be like a crazy exercise routine. It could be like a 20-minute YouTube yoga class. I know you're a fan of Yoga with Adrienne. Like, I think she's great. And going for a walk, even if it's chilly outside, any of that can be really, really helpful for your toolbox. I'm actually curious, like if other people have ways, like I don't know who else is watching, but if other people have ways they manage.
Yeah. Add them into the chat. And Michael said, thank you, by the way. I have a self-help book that I got a while ago, and I think a lot of books have something like this, but in the back it had some pages to fill in, and one of them was a self-soothing list. And it felt, filling it out for the first time felt like these things are all such small, silly things. Like they're not going to make a difference. They're little tiny, like you said, they're things that I almost know intellectually, right? Like, oh yeah, have some tea, stretch, meditate, or do breathing exercises, wear something cozy, like wear soft slippers, or have my furry blanket nearby, and wrap myself up in it. And I filled out that little list, and I actually took a picture of it on my phone. So now I have it everywhere I go. I don't just need to have that book with me. And I've been so surprised at how often I pull it up, because even though it was really easy to brainstorm those things and they felt kind of silly, when I'm in the moment of feeling stressed out or irritable or anxious, I am not thinking about those things.
I know it's so hard to access when you're feeling like that. Me too. So that's awesome that you have like this visual, like almost like a visual toolbox, like, ooh, these are the things that I could pull out right now. And like our brains try to tell us like, that's not going to work, or, that's such a little thing. Try it anyway, because it really is helpful. I know like by Thursday nights, I'm so tired, and it's not necessarily anxiety, but like my body is tense, and like I have a lot of tension in my neck and shoulders. And I go to the Mindful Recovery group a couple of Thursdays a month, and we do the movement part. And I'm always, and I don't, like my brain like forgets, surprised at how much better I feel. At 20 minutes of movement. So
our brains are so dumb sometimes.
They really are, but it's just their way of like trying to protect us,
Yeah, I feel that. I think that's often the thought process I'll get caught up in if I'm feeling anxious. I need to fix something. I need to do something. I need to solve this. And it is remarkable how my body actually has a lot to teach my brain about what will really help in that moment. And rarely is spinning it over in my thoughts helping. But if I pull out that list and I do 2 or 3, especially if I do like 2 or 3 things on it at once, like I'm going to get my hot tea, I'm going to get my cozy slippers, and I'm going to sit in my meditation spot. Even if I don't meditate, just like sit and stay. It takes some time, but I always feel better, and I don't always come up with an answer, but I know that I'm a better person in the world after I spend that time sitting. I'm not as irritable. I'm not as cranky with the people I love. I'm not as cranky with myself. And the disconnect between the body and the brain in our society is one of the biggest kind of injustices I think we do to ourselves. Recognizing that the good things we do for soothing ourselves 360 degrees toe to head, those have a huge impact on what happens between our ears. So
what you said too about like not figuring it out. Like you don't necessarily come up with an answer as to like what triggered it or why, or like what you're supposed to do next. And I think that that's a really important piece of it, because sometimes it's just anxiety over the state of the world. Like, and there's really nothing in the moment that you can do other than tend to what your needs are, because what good are we if we're not tending to our own needs and snuggling up in our blanket? And yeah, even if we don't meditate, it's fine. Even you just sit and have your cup of tea, which I think is still meditation. Yeah.
Yeah. You talked a little bit about kind of bedtime routine and having good sleep hygiene at the end of the day. Are there things that you recommend for coping with anxiety when it comes up when we're in the middle of something? Like if we're at work and we're stressed out about something and we're maybe not in a place where we can take 30 minutes or open up a yoga video or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love move a muscle, change a thought. So if you're able to get up from wherever you are and just go in a different part of, if you're in an office, go to a different part of the office. If you're able to get outside for like 5 minutes, not even, it could be 2 minutes. It helps. Like it helps kind of shift our thinking, especially if we're stuck in a loop, because we're taking our brain and our body someplace else. So doing that, sometimes just taking 3 deep intentional breaths, if that's all you can do, can really be a way to soothe. Yeah. So those things I think in the moment are helpful. Doing a little bit of writing, if that's something you enjoy doing, that could be helpful too. It just depends on the setting, but those, the 3 deep intentional breaths. And if you're able to breathe so that you expand your belly on the inhale and on the exhale, a lot of times those of us who are anxious, and this took me years to practice, we breathe all up here in the chest. And that actually signals to the body that we're in trouble. So practicing expanding the belly on the inhale and on the exhale, letting it fall. But it takes practice. I've actually had, I tell clients as a homework assignment, like go home, lay on your bed, put a book on your belly, like a big heavy book, and try and rise and fall. It took me years at doing yoga teacher training to figure out like how to shift that as an anxious person. So.
Yeah, something that people don't teach us also. We think it's all here. Yeah.
Yeah. So practicing that, or even just watching like a YouTube tutorial on, deep breathing is really helpful.
I love move a muscle, change a thought. So just do something differently in your body, get up, walk somewhere.
Yep.
Go into the break room at work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything. Yeah. Just kind of get yourself moving.
When it comes to, so one of the things that I hear people talking about a lot this year is kind of news anxiety, or people, you might have heard the word doom scrolling, kind of feeling like, how do I put it? Like the world is changing so fast, and so I need to keep up with what's happening. I mean, I think especially early in the days of the pandemic, I felt that like, what was going on and what was safe or not safe could change between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. And so I felt like I need to watch the news. I need to know what's happening. Do you have suggestions for how to find the right balance, or how to cope with the anxiety that comes up from the fact that we can be keyed into all of these different sources of news all day?
Yeah, I think giving ourselves permission to take a break from it, like knowing that if it's really important, someone's going to tell us. So we could even share that with somebody that that's close to us, to say, hey, like I need to take a break from social media or the news, but if something major happens, can you let me know? And decide, like, how long are you going to take the break? What are you taking the break from? Is it just the news? Is it the news and social media? Or limiting yourself. Like I know some people who have taken Facebook and all other social medias off their phone, and then they can only check it when they're on the computer. So it makes it less accessible. But yeah, it's like doom scrolling is definitely something that I think a lot of us can get hooked into. And then there's the opposite of doom scrolling. And I can't take credit from this. I don't know if you read Jen Pasteloff's book, On Being Human. so good. She's a yoga teacher. She's also hearing impaired, has some other mental health issues, eating disorder. And it's really about her story. And one of the things that she does to cope is called beauty hunting. So instead, I think it's the opposite, doom scrolling, beauty hunting. So for her, it's like purposely seeking out beauty in some way. Like sort of like you posted that song. I know I didn't get a chance to hear it yet, but like that stuff can be really beneficial too. Like instead of looking at one news story and then clicking on the link that takes you to another horrible news story, you know, trying to do the opposite.
I have a friend we were just talking about this one day, and it turns out we both use Instagram kind of for that purpose. And you could do it if you're somebody who likes social media, you could probably do it by thinking differently about the different social media platforms you use. But you could also, I guess, create a separate account if you wanted to. But for both of us, we were saying, it's my friend Jared and I, we were saying that on Instagram, we only follow things that we love. Like we don't, Facebook is different. Facebook, we get news, we get articles, we get good news and bad news. We connect with people in a different way, and that's fine. But for whatever reason on our Instagram accounts, I'm like, I just follow like beautiful memes. I follow like fat woman and body empowerment and fashion, like, or, you know, accounts. I follow tattoo accounts. I follow therapists who post like positive things. And that means that when I open up Instagram, I actually like know that it's more of a self-care activity, and it is connecting with the world, but it's like, it's curated, I guess, right? It's curated to say like, I know that everything I scroll through is going to be something that makes me feel stronger or empowered or better about the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true. I like that. Yeah. And I definitely use TikTok for that reason.
See?
It reminds me how silly and stupid and wonderful people can be, like in a good way.
I feel the same way. Yeah. And people talk a lot about social media always having that downside of bringing in so many bad things, but you can decide which things you follow and which things you don't. And I do think that's one of the silver linings of the fact that there are different platforms that you can kind of decide that. You know, you could go onto TikTok and pull up NBC News. They have a TikTok account now and you could follow it, but you don't have to.
Yeah.
You can just follow teenagers doing awesome dances.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the Gritty account. I follow the account for Gritty, the Flyers mascot.
Right out. I haven't done that yet.
Yeah. A question. There was a question from Paula that came earlier, so I'm going to read it. Paula says, I'm tuning in because I wanted to hear about managing anxiety. When I was 12, my siblings and I were involved in a car accident. Because of that event as an adolescent, I always dealt with anxiety of driving with other people. And Paul says 52 years later, it seems to have exacerbated and gotten worse the older I've gotten. So she says, to date, I'm uncomfortable driving with people, driving any distance, and driving at night. And my fear is that this problem will discourage me from traveling or eventually leaving my home at all.
Yeah.
Oh, that's tough.
It is. It is. I think like acknowledging it and naming that it's there is the first step. I think that's awesome that you're sharing about it here. And, you know, obviously it sounds to me, and I'm sure you've already done this, but like maybe tapping into seeing a therapist who can help you work through that particular issue. I do know, and I'm not diagnosing anybody, but if it's that persistent for that long, it actually could be helpful to maybe even consider something like EMDR. I don't know if you or Lee are familiar with it. It's a type of therapy that uses bilateral stimulation, just with either tapping or using like vibrating tappers that can kind of reprocess things that were traumatic in a way that you still remember them, but they don't have such an impact. I don't practice it. I have tons of colleagues who do, and it's amazing. Like I actually have it done myself for some of my own past trauma. So,
what does EMDR stand for again? Eye movement
desensitization reprocessing.
And it's kind of a biofeedback type of therapy, right? It's engaging is it biofeedback, or is that the wrong word?
It's bilateral stimulation. So it's basically like like drumming, for example, is very similar to EMDR because you're using like the two hands to stimulate the brain bilaterally. There's a really great website. It's called emdria. I think it's .org, EMDRIA.org. And on there, they kind of explain the ins and outs and what it is. And then you can actually also access therapists in the area who do it. Yeah, it's pretty cool. And even just, it isn't necessarily EMDR per se, but bilateral stimulation is very calming. So there's this thing called the butterfly tap that I love, where you kind of hook your thumbs together and you just lightly tap on your chest. It really is very soothing. And I'm a big fan of kind of like rocking from side to side when I do it. It's very soothing. So just that. And not that that solves anything. It just kind of brings down that level of anxiety. Yeah.
There's been a big shift for me in recognizing how those things help, even if they don't solve anything. Sometimes all I need is to feel okay doing the thing I'm afraid of doing, right? So I think when I first started kind of waking up to the fact that, oh, right, I have mental health, you know, even if I don't have a diagnosable issue at the moment, I have things going on. I have things that I can be talking about with a therapist. I have issues that come up in my life that benefit from that kind of support and care. And I think my first instinct was I need to get to the bottom of it. I need to get to the root. I need to figure out why I am the way I am. And I need to, if I do that, then I will never feel bad again, right? And learning so much about normalizing, again, the fact that we are all going to go through things in life. We have traumas that we live through. We have hard times that we live through. And this year is a big, hard time for all of us. To not be affected by it would be inhuman. You know, it's part of our humanness that we're struggling with the repercussions of what's going on this year. So all of which is to say, those smaller things and those self-soothing things and those physical things that don't fix it, quote unquote, if they make me calm or help me feel better to the point that I can do the thing I was afraid of doing or the thing that I was stuck with, then they fixed it in a way. You know, if I feel well enough to go drive, even if I haven't figured out or rooted down to, you know, eradicate the issue I'm dealing with, that matters. You know, it's not about perfection. It's about living.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of times, yeah, like you said, it's a lot about letting our body know that we're safe. Like if our brain is going, oh my gosh, driving is something bad is going to happen, we can do some body-based things that help us to feel really safe, like maybe the bilateral or even some of the self-soothing strategies. I had one client who struggles with driving because she's been in several accidents. We came up with a couple different things. She sort of had like a little calming routine that she would do for herself beforehand by breathing, but then she put a picture of her grandmother on her like a rearview mirror or whatever, where she could see it, like sort of that represented protection for her. So sometimes it's just those little things that help us to feel safe to do the things that are really anxiety producing. And we want to avoid the things that are scary and uncomfortable, but a lot of times leaning into those and doing those things, if it's driving, if it's being around people with social anxiety, that actually brings down the level of anxiety. But you're right, you have to have the tools first. Like, and that's what I tell people who come to intensive outpatient treatment is sometimes they'll want to be like, let's get to the bottom of my trauma. Let's figure all this stuff out. And it's like, why don't we come up with some tools to help you feel calmer first, and then we'll get into that later.
Yeah. And then you can use those tools when you are out in the world and this comes up again, because
it will.
Because that's how it works. Yeah. You don't check off the box and say, I will never be anxious again. as much as we might wish it.
Exactly. And I think that's where, like, for me, that was like the game changer, was recognizing that nothing I'm going to do is going to make it necessarily go away. So accepting that it's there, naming it, and then, you know, changing my environment, or doing some intentional movement, practicing yoga, breathing, all of those things are what's going to help, but I'm not going to necessarily make it go away.
Yeah. Are there any other tools or strategies that we haven't talked about? I mean, I think you talked about, I love move a muscle, change a thought as one option. Breathing exercises and downloading apps. I know I use Insight Timer, which is free, which has a lot of good meditations. Sleep hygiene and sleep routine, kind of maybe coming up with your self-soothing list and having those things ready to go. Is there anything else? I love the idea about kind of setting boundaries around intake of news, and maybe even enlisting help or a partner or someone to help support you with that and let you know if something is important. Do you think we've missed any other key strategies for 2020 anxiety?
Starting a meditation practice. And I think for folks with anxiety, that's the scariest thing ever, because it's basically like asking you to get quiet and probably sit
with your anxiety for 20 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. And I had a meditation teacher years ago. She said that meditating is learning how to sit with your shit. And she was right. So starting small, like 2 or 3 minutes a day, learning how to like build it into your routine, and then maybe doing some reading about it or joining an online meditation group. Tara Brach has some awesome resources on her website as to how to start a meditation practice that I love. I constantly refer clients to that. Setting a space in your house to do it. Any of that can be really beneficial. Meditation doesn't have to be like this big elusive thing. And I know a lot of folks at WellSprings already probably have a practice, but it's probably one of the best things for anxiety. It, again, teaches our body that we're safe. And it also teaches us to take a little bit of a step back from some of the thoughts that might be running through our mind that are causing us to feel anxious, and that we don't really have to grab onto that thought and then go down the spiral of, but what if this, what if this, what if this, right?
When you are talking with people who have never meditated before, do you encourage them to, Tara Brach's website you said is a good one. Are there particular resources or places you encourage them to look?
Yeah, Tara Brach's website. And then I used to tell people about her, and I think she still has it, the Mindfulness Daily, which is her and Jack Cornfield. And it's like a 10-minute a day practice for, I don't remember how many weeks it is, but it basically goes through like the basics of mindfulness meditation and then builds on the next. And what's great about it is you it's okay if you miss like 5 days and then your next day is 5 days later, like you're not going to lose anything from it, but it's like a basic working towards that. But even if you don't use an app, just kind of making a commitment to sit and get quiet for just a few minutes a day. You can set a timer. Is just one really great way to start. And then in sessions, we'll maybe talk a little bit about how to start kind of taking a step back from your thoughts, being the observer of your thoughts. Yeah.
It's 2:52, so I just want to make sure that I say for anybody watching, if you have questions, or even if you just have thoughts coming up as you're listening to our conversation that you want to share, go ahead and type them into the comments in the bottom, and we will see them, and then we'll get to answer them and talk about them before we sign off at 3. So feel free to share. While you were talking about meditation, Jen, it reminded me that, we talk about meditation a lot at WellSprings, and I often have people come to me and say some variation of the same thing I experienced when I started a meditation practice, which is it's not helping. Like this, there was, for me, and I think for a lot of people, there's an expectation that people are recommending this to help with anxiety. And yet, as you said, you sit for the first time or even for the first week or the first couple weeks, and there is not some great epiphany that happens at the end of 20 minutes sitting silently. There's not some new feeling of everything's better and I understand why Jen told me I should do this. Often there's confusion, like, I don't think it's working. I don't think this is helping me. I'm genuinely curious, because I try to describe it to people all the time. How do you help people kind of set expectations for what meditation might be like and what it will do, especially as you're starting out?
Yeah. So I definitely say, like, it's not like a pill you can take that's going to like solve all your anxiety problems. It sometimes actually in the beginning can feel worse because you're learning how to really get quiet with it. But what it does ultimately is helps you to, like I said, take a step back from it. So you're not so fused with it and constantly figuring out like how to make it better or to fix it. You're just learning how to observe and watch it. So in the beginning, it might be really uncomfortable. As a matter of fact, it will be. But then what'll happen is, like, gradually people will start to tell me like they're noticing they're less reactive. Maybe they're fighting with their partners less, they're less irritable, but it doesn't happen overnight. And it's asking folks to just kind of pay attention to that stuff, but like lower your expectations,
Yeah. And in the moment as you meditate, I think it was key for me to realize that the practice of noticing what was coming up and then returning to my breath is the practice.
Yes.
It's I think I heard it first as like, that's what you're supposed to do. And when the thoughts would come up, my training, my whole life was always follow the thought and try to figure it out,
Yeah.
And that is what is counterintuitive and different about mindfulness or meditation practice than the rest of your life, is that for these 10 minutes, you can go back to the thought when the timer goes off. It will still be there, right? Like, for these 10 minutes, you notice it and then you let it go and you come back to, okay, I'm breathing in and I'm breathing out. And that's all I'm going to focus on. And as those thoughts come up, it's not wrong or bad. That's the point of it, is that you get to notice and, like you said, be that observer in a way that you don't usually get to do in the rest of the 24 hours of the day. I found it really helpful, even though it felt very counterintuitive to me for a long time.
Yeah.
And it's hard, I think, with anything like that. People are skeptical when you say it'll suck at first, but just stick with it. Like,
I have a colleague who always says celebrate the catch. So like, when every time you catch yourself like getting caught up in a thought and maybe you were already like gone down the rabbit hole and all of a sudden you're like, oh, wait a minute, like I'm supposed to be focusing on my breath. That's the magic moment. A lot of people take that and say, oh, I'm doing it wrong. Like there's something wrong with me. And that's actually not it. Like, it's that catch moment where you're like, oh, back to the breath. That's it. And that might happen 70 times throughout a 20-minute practice. And maybe you only get 30 seconds of being with your breath. That's awesome.
Yeah. A lot like physical exercise in some ways, right? It's an exercise. So when you go to the gym for the first time, it hurts and it sucks. And, for some reason we're better at preparing ourselves for that. I think it's, there are some parallels with working with your mind and your thoughts.
I agree. Definitely. I like that analogy. Like, it's like going to the gym. You're going to be sore and you're not going to want to go back.
Yeah.
Go anyway.
And then paradoxically, you start to notice what feels good and you notice things about your body. And same thing with your thoughts. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't see any more questions, I don't think. Paula thanked us for the suggestions and she said she's going to look into EMDR.
Awesome.
I don't know, Jen, is there anything we didn't cover? Anything that you think is kind of most important to keep in mind in the months ahead to support our mental health?
No, I think it's just remembering that like anxiety is normal. It's like a normal part of being human. And if it gets overwhelming, like don't hesitate to ask for help. There's nothing wrong with you, really. And it's probably going to get overwhelming at some point. And you can certainly, if you're friends with me on Facebook, send me a message and I can point you in the right direction. Like, really, I'm really happy to do that.
Yeah, and same for me, obviously. I'm happy to provide people with more resources, with referrals to therapists, and with other options that don't cost money, with all kinds of different, there's all kinds of different ways to get support.
Yeah.
Oh, Susan has a question. I don't know if that's a question. Susan says, we will all feel better after November 3rd. I thought at first you might have said, will we all feel better after November 3rd?
God, I hope so.
I hope so too, but we'll be ready if we don't, is kind of my approach.
It's
right?
true. I mean, we've already been through so much. Like we can handle a lot more than I think we can, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Jen. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and doing Facebook Live for the first time.
Yeah, it was fun.
You were
to watch my own anxiety about all this, but now I feel great. So I appreciate it. This was really fun.
You got to practice in real time with us.
I did. Yeah. I hope it was helpful.
It was. Thank you so much for giving the time and for sharing. And I'm gonna download this like I always do, and it'll be on WellSprings YouTube channel too. So we'll see if people have questions and they're watching this video later after the live. Jen, you're tagged in the video, so if people comment questions and stuff, feel free to do that, and we'll try to answer later on also.
Perfect. Awesome.
All right. Thanks, Jen. Good luck with the rest of your day. I hope it's less weird and that something works out.
If it's weird, I'll just practice my self-soothing later.
Good luck.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Bye, Jen. Bye, everybody.